For me, the heart of the Brutalist is the relationship between Laszlo, the main character, a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust and a Hungarian architect, and Harrison Vanburen, a successful American businessman who benefited from World War II. These are two completely opposite people. However, as Vanburen says,
"It is no coincidence that fate brought us together on the eve of my mother's death."
In my view, the core of this relationship is displayed through this scene. The scene when he actually talks about that he was a child out of wedlock. This scene, which is my favorite scene of the movie, by the way, in one way indicates the subtlety of the character of Van Buren. He really wants to have a deep relationship with the art and the artist, and the beauty of this scene is to show how sincere he is in this endeavor. The very private and intimate story that he tells to Laszlo about his grandparents is partly about how he's been yearning for the actual communication. It shows that he understands that there is something more than just the capitalist system of exchange. But the twistedness of this character is that he can't really grasp of it. The only way that he could is with his wealth. The only way that he could have an actual conversation with his estranged grandparents is through his wealth. Whether they love him for it and say,
"What a thoughtful grandson I was,"
or to belittle them to two tramps.
No, the two of them just wept and came apart like beggars.
Money here is a catalyst for owning his grandparents' relationship with him. In other words, in this twisted way, the only way that he could have a meaningful communication with the world is when he owns it. That's why he's a collector of first editions of books and art and wine. Now, if you notice, not just during his tale, but in the entire sequence of the party, the film keeps intercutting to a slow motion of people and things. But precisely during this specific conversation, when Van Buren tells the tale, the film intercuts to a woman speaking with a glass of wine in her hand, a young man smoking, people playing cards, they throw money on the table, a necklace on a woman's neck. And finally, a man interrupts to admire the library that Laszlo had built, the same library that at first Van Buren furiously deemed it.
"The room! It's gutted!"
The man compared it to probably the Library of Babel, a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, while the film intercuts to the library as people watch like spectators. It almost looks like it's a religious artifact for people to worship. That's why for me, this interaction of cuts reveals what Marx says about a form of relationship in the capitalist system. He says, mysterious character of the commodity form, which consists in the fact that the definite social relation between men themselves assumes here, for them, the fantastic form of a relation between things. In other words, and in the context of this scene, the relationship between people becomes the relationship between commodities and vice versa. He calls this form of interaction Commodity Fetishism. Commodities, Marx explains in the first chapter of his book Capital, because of the system of exchange in the capitalist system, are never as they are. The concreteness of the commodity is alienated, which in Marx's theory is directly linked to the labor that produced it. Instead, its worth is related to other commodities. Hence, the societal influence of this relative value system is attributed to the commodities it produces. The subjectivity of this attribution is where the concept of fetishism comes into the picture. Marx uses the word fetishism as the term that was related to indigenous religion, which was recently studied by anthropologists of the time. Fetish was an object that in indigenous religion became the subject of worship and also sacrifice, the magical, abstract, subjective element that is projected to the object is where Marx wants to accentuate on, to explain the dynamic between commodity and magical realm of human subjectivity. This intercutting between things and people and a tale that, as discussed, is a tale of ownership of the relationships, which is a result of commodity fetishism, for me is an indication of how the upper class use this process to control not just the things but people, and here in the room and in the film as a whole, it manifests itself mostly through Vanburen's character. The intercutting and the tale implicitly tells us how Vanburen wants to own not only the art, but Laszlo, the artist himself. Now here, a very interesting thing is the response Laszlo gives to Vanburen when asked,
Why architecture?
What he says in the scene partly is in defiance of what Marx describes as commodity fetishism.
Is there a better description of a cube than that of its construction?
The concreteness of this structure is a point itself to deconstruct the seemingly objective but in actuality subjective value that's projected to a work of art. His brilliant speech is a form of freedom, not only from what had happened to him in the war,
When the terrible recollections of what happened in Europe cease to humiliate us, I expect for them to serve instead as a political stimulus.
but to what's going on in that room and in that party. The film only intercuts one time during that speech when he says, I already anticipate the rhetoric of anger and fear. The whole river of such frivolities may flow undammed. The river of frivolity here is the money and subsequently ownership and commodity fetishism that the brutalist style of his art are devised to endure such erosion. And I think this speech, although poetic for Vanburen, is all that he's not, and that's exactly what he wants to own, the freedom that he recognizes, and paradoxically he wants to have by owning it. That's why he decides after the conversation that Laszlo will build the center for his mother. And that's the main conflict of the film and foreshadows what's about to come to these characters. In a way, this film is about the freedom from all dogmas and systems of ideologies, whether from fascists or from the capitalist system. One of the iconic shots of the movie is the upside down frame of the Statue of Liberty. At first, the obvious critic of this imagery comes into mind, but when I saw this film afterwards, and especially the scene that I analyzed here, added another meaning. There is a freedom of framing here to display how one could look at such artifact, free from the subjectivity that's in line with the commodity fetishism, and that's a relationship that Laszlo has with the word and art.
I'm not sure what to do with them is all.
Leave it like that.
So what do you think, guys? Is this the main conflict, or do you disagree with me? There are so many things to talk about this movie that's so great about it. So if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, I would be really grateful. Thank you.